Casa Susanna tells a history of a safe haven for transgender expression in the Catskills that was kept secret for 6 decades. I'm Thom Powers, and this is Pure Nonfiction. The film Casa Susanna made its debut last year at the Venice and Toronto Film Festivals. It's now streaming on PBS Passport. The first clue about the story was a book published in 2005 called Casa Susanna. It's a collection of amateur photographs discovered at a Manhattan flea market. They reveal a community of cross-dressing men in the Catskills outside of New York City. One photograph shows a homemade property sign that says Casa Susanna. When the book was published, everything was a mystery about these photos and the people in them. The French filmmaker Sébastien Lifshitz was mesmerized by the book. He's been making films about queer culture in France for over 25 years. He learned that a photo historian named Isabelle Bonnet had conducted deeper research into Casa Susanna and identified 4 living witnesses to its history. Sébastien convinced those 4 to be interviewed for the film. One is Kate, now in her 80s. She grew up in Australia.
I can remember as far back as about 5, my sister dressing me in one of her old dresses. The fact that I absolutely adored the feeling and wanted it to go on, wished it could happen every day. Wished that when my father came home from the sea, I could say, "You've got 2 daughters now." One doesn't know where these thoughts start.
Eventually, Kate came to the United States, seeking to find a community that would understand her.
Visiting Casa Susanna was almost a necessity for me. I had to leave my family in Australia and come to America because I needed to know more about myself. I needed to know what it would be like to live as a woman for an extended period. And in the back of my mind, I thought, if I go to Casa Susanna and I find that I am more woman inside than I am man, that might be the point where my new life starts.
Another person who came to Casa Susanna was Diana, also in her 80s today. Over 60 years ago, she had yet to come out as transgendered. She was living in Indiana as a husband in a straight marriage with a wife named Julie. Diana tells her story.
I don't even know how I got invited to Casa Susanna. I desperately, of course, wanted to go to this Halloween party, and I had no idea how I would ever pull it off. But I sort of got Julie to agree that it would be okay for me to do that, to maybe find some stuff out about myself. So off I went, and it was an incredibly dangerous adventure with a big suitcase. Stood on the highway, and I hitchhiked from Valparaiso, Indiana to Casa Susanna. The first thing that happened was, I think we went into the main house, and there was somebody there who would set my hair. Now, I never had my hair curled, ever, and it was just the most exciting experience. It was unbelievable to me. It's so unbelievable to me what those small pleasures, how thrilling they were. It all seems kind of silly and funny, and it is. Even then it was done with a light heart, but it was also very piquant, very poignant. And one of the cross-dressers, Gloria, gave me this wonderful pair of shoes that had these high heels that were just spectacular, and they fit, and I was pretty successful. So they were all kind of oohing and ahhing, and that was, great support. It made me feel really authentic, made me feel like, wow, this is, I could really be like this.
Casa Susanna only lasted for a few years, from the late 1950s to the early 60s. The film shines a light on the couple who created this safe space. Susanna was the female persona of a Chilean immigrant named Tito. He was married to Maria, an Italian-American woman deeply supportive of Tito's double life as Susanna. We'll hear more about them later on. I asked Sébastien about his career documenting queer stories and how Casa Susanna fits in that body of work. He brought up a film he made in 2012 called The Invisibles that profiles older queer figures in France.
So when I did this movie, The Invisible, it was a way for me to have a concrete incarnation of what is to be an old gay person. You know, I had no idea because all the media, nobody would do an article about that or would do a film or an exhibition. You had absolutely no information, no pictures, no nothing, and so I was really very curious about this invisibility, you know, of all this community of all gay men and women, you know, and I thought it was really unfair, and I was myself very curious about their stories, you know, and I wanted to know what happened to them when they were young, and then how they have built their life, and they maybe have conquered their freedom, you know, to be themselves. And so the film was about all of this, and it was very personal for me. It came really from, also it came from the collection of snapshots that I have of gay couple, because through these images, you could see very happy people on the pictures. But the thing is, the history of gay people, most of the time, is very sad, is sometimes very tragic. But the thing is, the pictures I have gave me a different incarnation, which was more joyful. And so I was wondering if the history was more probably complex than this, you know, that maybe it was not a story about victims, or not only victims. Of course they were, because the society in those times were so hostile, you know, to them. So they had to fight, and they had to find a way, you know, to assume and to live who they were. But through these pictures that I found on flea markets or internet or garage sales, I could see that people in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 60s, whatever, some of them have succeeded, you know, to have really a nice life. Well, I mean, on the pictures, you could see that. And also the existence of the pictures itself, you know, was a question to me, because I knew that it was quite dangerous to produce, you know, to make those pictures. And so everything was, I mean, I was full of questions, you know, so I wanted to meet people of those generations and to ask them how it was, you know, and to recreate a kind of memory and a kind of history. And also I've realized that because of AIDS, many of gay people have died. And so the transmission, you know, of a memory and, you know, this continuity through generation was broken, destroyed in a way. And so I had this a kind of obsession to recreate a kind of memory and just to link myself to them. And for me, Casa Susanna, in a way, it's the same about the queer culture and the history of trans identity. For me, it's a very important story because you are with anonymous people, and most of the time when we speak about history, we always refer to very famous people. They are the incarnation of time. They are the incarnation of history. And for me, this is not right, you know. It's much more interesting when you're talking about history to go through the people and, you know, to tell a story with all this anonymous person. And for me, it's more real.
I mean, you're so right. You know, a figure like Christine Jorgensen has a positive use in history in that it's someone that we can point to as a historical marker in time. But I think the way history was written, the way you describe, figures like that can also overshadow the wider history or the wider experiences of people who did not grab those headlines.
Exactly, exactly. It's like, I mean, we're so used, to when a magazine wants to do something about the 60s, about the 40s, whatever, most of the time they try to find the famous people of those times, and to tell you how it was, the clothes, how people were living. But for me, it's a kind of fairy tale. It's not the reality of the basic life that people had every day. And for me, snapshots and photography is very important into my practice of cinema, because they are documentation, but also they are memory and a kind of reincarnation of what people have been through. It's really, it's so alive to me. And so most of I use a lot pictures, photography into my films. I love that. It's a very important incarnation of what I'm trying to say.
Kate and Diana, the two women who were participated in Casa Susanna, when you met them, what was their feelings about participating in a project like this?
Kate was already someone who was into the militancy. She has written an autobiography in Australia, because she was living in Australia. And so for her to build a narrative from her life was something easy. It was something that she was into, this desire, to make people understand what is to be a trans woman. And but for Diana, it was something else, because Diana had a surgery for, how do you say, a réassignation.
Gender reassignment surgery.
Gender reassignment, exactly. So she had this very young, actually, when she was around 24, 25, in Mexico, in Tijuana, exactly. And then after the operation, she became a kind of invisible woman into the American society. She went to the West Coast, and she lived there as a woman. And for like 60 years, nobody knew her story. And I remember when I talked to her about being into the film, on one hand, I think she was a bit afraid. She didn't know if she was able to create a kind of narrative with her life, and if it was possible for her to be natural in front of a camera, and to remember everything, all the details. But also I think it was very challenging to her, because it was the first time for her that she would say that the person she was, she was watching herself, in front of the camera. And it was a big deal for her. It was very important, because now that she's at the end of her life, she felt the need to reconciliate in a way with her whole story. And actually she was quite proud of it, and so she wanted to say it loud, and it was very brave, to do this, I think. And that's why she's getting very emotional into the film, because she never said anything about all this past to anybody for so many years.
The details of her story, I get goosebumps just thinking about it, because they're so vivid. Her hitchhiking from Indiana to the Catskills to be part of this community, and
It was crazy. It was, I mean, she put herself in so big danger in a way, you know, but the need to do it, to meet all these people. I mean, she felt so lonely and she didn't know how to build her life, you know, as a woman. If we go back in those days, you know, the American society was really hostile, you know, with everything that was out of the norms, and so, and especially the cross dressers. That's what the term, you know, at that time that they used. So and for Diana, it was very important to meet this community. It was for her probably a possibility to find a way, you know. And I think many of those people actually that went to the Casa Susanna was in the same situation. There were white people from the middle class. Some of them had a kind of good situation, and it was really dangerous for them to take the risk, you know, to go there and to cross-dress and maybe to be discovered by the local police or whatever, you know, and because in those times you could be arrested for very few things, you know, if you were not in I'm so sorry, it's so difficult to say that in English, but you have a kind of morality and values that was so important. And also the society at that time was so focused on the Cold War and communists, but the communists were not the only enemies, you know, gay people were also the target. And so the context was really nervous, you know, and difficult. So when they met, you know, at the Casa Susanna, I think they had all this background, you know, all this context, you know, in their mind, probably. Casa Susanna was a kind of a very peaceful place, but still, you know, the context of the society, you know, was there, you know, and so they took many risks, and Diana was one of them, of course.
Now I want to bring up another key figure in the film named Gregory. He's the grandson of Maria, who is married to Tito, a.k.a. Susanna. As a boy, Gregory spent summers at Casa Susanna and grew up with a non-judgmental attitude about it. His grandmother, Maria, owned a wig shop in Manhattan. Gregory tells her story.
And then one day she met Tito, this gentleman who came into the shop and was trying on wigs and pretending it was for his sister or his niece or something like that. And she basically outed him and said, "Oh, come on, I know this is for you." And he was rather shocked, but she did it in a loving way. And Tito told me later that he was so impressed by her openness and by her acceptance of him that, you know, she was the one and special person in his life. Tito was very affable and energetic. He was a radio commentator for the Latin American station in the United States. He used to come up to the country place for us, and he used to dress as a woman and become Susanna. And we weren't supposed to know that. And so one day I was at the porch in the country, and Susanna grabbed me and sat down and had a conversation and revealed himself to me. And at the end of the conversation, I said to him, you know, if my grandmother loved you, then you were okay with me. And he was very touched by that.
Sébastien explained that he met Gregory through the photo historian Isabelle Bonnet.
Actually, Isabelle has found Gregory through the name of Susanna. She has made some, there was some possibility in the whole state because there was different people with the same first name and name, you know. And so she has made some email like this, and one of them has answered, and it was Gregory. And he was very surprised, I think, first, that Isabel could find him, and knew about the story of Casa Susanna. And then when I went to New York, I met him, and we told him that we were preparing a film, and it was so important, for us that it could be into the film and that it could tell the whole story. Because the thing is that Isabel has found many important elements, of the story, but not the whole thing, not the whole story. Gregory was actually the only one who knew everything, especially also the end of the Casa Susanna, because nobody knew exactly what happened, what it has stopped suddenly from one day to another. And also so many details that Gregory was the only one to know, about the relation between Susanna and Maria. Because Casa Susanna is first, this crazy love story about Susanna and Maria.
Well, Gregory is such a striking figure in the film um, because whatever associations we make about people based on their appearance, when I see Gregory, I think of an Italian American New Yorker who is probably uh, more traditional and not open to transgender lifestyles. And so to hear him be so insightful, compassionate, um, uh, is kind of a revelation from the moment that we see him on screen to the stories we hear him tell in the film.
Gregory is an amazing guy. He has such an open mind, and a big heart, really. And he loved his grandmother. I think Casa Susanna was for him a kind of lost paradise. He grew up there during holidays and during some weekends, and he loved being there with this community. The problem was more with his mother, actually, because Maria had a daughter from a previous marriage, and Yolanda, that was the name of Maria's daughter, was a very conservative woman, and from time to time she was very hostile to those people, who was going to the Casa Susanna, and also she was protecting probably too much, her kids, because for her it was very not normal, just to have all these people. She was just afraid, and also probably the context of the period, was such create a kind of fear, of everything, and so Gregory, said to me that, and he said also into the film that Yolanda was really in between, From time to time, she was okay with Susanna, and because Susanna has helped her to think and maybe to go into show business, because Yolanda has some desire to become a famous singer, and so Susanna was helping her, about that. So during those moments, it was okay. Let's say the relation was okay, but probably Yolanda was not accepting to see her mother loving Tito Susanna, and to see them as a couple, And for her, it was so weird, because when Susanna was a woman, then she would see her mother as a lesbian, and they were a kind of lesbian couple, and probably for her and for those times, it was just impossible to admit that, it was just impossible.
The book of photographs came out, and there were people like you who discovered it and became deeply curious about Casa Susanna, and then many years go by before you're able to connect with these people who actually knew the story of the place. Um, were they aware that there were people like you uh, who had developed this curiosity? You said a minute ago that Gregory was surprised that anyone was interested or knew anything about the history of Casa Susanna. Did he know about the existence of that book?
I know Kate has the book. Diana, I'm not sure. Maybe, but I'm not sure. And Gregory, no. Now I remember. Gregory didn't know about the book, and he was quite upset actually, because he thinks that the picture that you can see into the book and those pictures were found on the flea market on the 25th Street in New York, were stolen actually from Susanna apartment, or they were a part of Susanna's how do you say property, I mean
Yeah.
and so he was kind of quite upset that that to realize that a book was made just like this. But on the other hand, he understood that it was also important to reveal that story, that people could know everything that happened there, and what his grandmother did for everybody, and what Susanna was, and everything. So, but it's true that he didn't know, and I think Diana didn't know herself too.
So, but that clears up a mystery about the book and the original source material. In Gregory's view, those were photographs that had been once the property of Susanna, and somehow got out into the world.
Exactly. He didn't know exactly how. He think that from a certain time, the belongings of Susanna went into a storage, and the storage was how do you say, some people stole.
They stole out the storage, or sometimes those storage lockers, if you stop paying rent,
Exactly.
they give away.
I think
they
this
auction
is exactly
off.
what happened. Yeah, and so he think that this is how it happened, and then it went to a flea market. But the funny thing for me is, it's because of those photographs that we know something about Casa Susanna, because this story normally would have been invisible, totally lost into a kind of big secret. And this film shouldn't have been done, normally. This story was supposed to be completely, secret. So, fortunately, it's because of these pictures that now we know everything. That was the start.
Can you talk about the experience of going up to the actual property and gathering these four people who were witness to that history on the property?
Well, for me, the experience of going to the Casa Susanna and also to invite the witnesses of the film to go there was very important, because it was a way for me to create a kind of emotional environment. Because when I film people talking in front of the camera, it's not an interview in a classic way. It's more a moment of life, because you are there, you feel the past, and it creates, a kind of atmosphere that put them into a kind of very emotional state, which is very important during the conversation that I can have with them, So going there was for me essential, to the film, and also to have a real incarnation of the passage of time, which is something also very important to me, that what the ruins, of the property, and are very moving to me. There are the traces. It's a kind of archaeology. When you do a film like this, like photographs, everything are traces of time, and through the trees and the wind and the houses, and everything is speaking to you. I think this is how I feel, and I think that's the way also Diana, Kate, and Gregory and Betsy felt the same.
I want to ask you about your work with the editor, Tina Boz, who I see that you've worked with on other films before. The structure of this film is so delicate because it doesn't have it doesn't have like a strong continuity to it. What's known about Casa Susanna is very thin, and it's almost like you've hung this like a clothesline, and then you put these different stories on that clothesline: the story of Kate, the story of Diana, the story of Donald Walheim and his daughter Betsy, the story of Gregory and what he knows. But can you talk about how you and Tina worked out the structure of the film?
Actually, the structure of the film was quite difficult to build, because you have different lives into the film, and you have a kind of intersection, which is Casa Susanna in itself, where everybody is meeting, but you have a life before that of each, and you have also the life after Casa Susanna for each of them too. So the thing was to create a kind of narrative that was very fluid, very because I'm obsessed with this, just to create a kind of in French we say épure, which means something very, like you said, a kind of line, like an obvious line, and which is probably the hardest things to do, when you do a documentary. And so we had, to have a kind of opening with the presentation of each of them, but without the feeling of a kind of presentation. And then, because the idea was to create a kind of trip, a separate trip, where everybody is going to the Casa Susanna, and during the trip, you can start with the past, and when they were the past before the story of Casa Susanna itself. And then when they arrived and they meet each other, you have also these emotional moments, when they see each other, because some of them didn't see for like years, like Betsy and Kate, for example, or Diana and Kate for so many years. And so, which was a very moving moment, And then you have the life after the Casa Susanna. And so with Tina, it took us like 6 or 7 months, to create the narrative into the film. And you have also all the archives that are very important, the photographs, all the films, the Super 8 film that Gregory has found. It was a miracle, because first we had no Super 8. I've heard this story that when Casa Susanna was sold, the new owner of the place, Susanna didn't took off all the photographs and films and everything. Everything was left into the house. And thus the new owner took everything to the garbage. Because I spoke with his daughter, and she told me this. So for me, that was really, really painful. And I mean, it's a destruction of a so important memory, So, and not only for the place in itself, but also for the history of, about the queer culture. You have so very few documents, about cross-dressers, transgender people. There are so rare, you know.
So there had been the destruction of films and photographs a long time ago, but Gregory managed to find some things along the way.
Yes, in his garage, actually. I remember that I sent him many emails saying to him, please go back into your garage and look everywhere if you could find something. And I remember that one day he sent me an email saying, I found something, you know, and he took some pictures, you know, and it was full of Super 8, but we didn't know what was inside, you know, and so we were lucky enough to have all these very precious, you know, Super 8 films where you can see Susanna and Maria together, and they were so beautiful films.
You've made lots of films about different aspects of queer history and queer lives. What made this one unique?
I did a portrait film in France of Bambi. Bambi, not the character of Walt Disney, but Bambi is one of the first transgender women in France, and she had an amazing life. And I remember that when I was doing this film, Bambi was so full of joy, and her life is so just amazing. It's really like a fairy tale. And I remember when I was doing Casa Susanna, I could feel that the context of all those lives were so much more violent, I would say. And so I could feel that how difficult it was for these people during the 50s and 60s, and how American society was violent in those times. And so against, and how difficult it was for them, you know, to assume who they were and to be free, you know. It was really a fight, a big fight. And so I feel so much respect, you know, and for me the film is a kind of tribute to them, you know, because they were pioneers, and I don't know, I feel, yeah, I love them, really.
Thanks Sébastien Lifshitz for speaking with me. His film, Casa Susanna, is streaming on PBS Passport. I hope you'll subscribe to Pure Nonfiction's email newsletters. We have Producer's Notebook on the business of documentary and Editor's Notebook on storytelling. You can subscribe for free at purenonfiction.net. Thanks to our team. Series producer, Hannah Nordenswan. Marketing manager, Bella Racklin. Our intern, Sahai John, and web designer, Cross Strategy. Our theme music is composed by Andre Williams, and our executive producer is Rafaela Nehausen. I'm Thom Powers. Follow us on Instagram at Pure Nonfiction.